I am giving you a lawful order. Move this truck, now.
Officer, my patient is unstable. Moving the vehicle will endanger his life. We will not be moving.
You don't get to say no to me! You're obstructing. Turn around.
Hey, what the hell are you?
The call had come in as a fall with injury, a dispatch code that could mean anything from a scraped knee to a life-ending cerebral hemorrhage. For paramedic Jessica Russo, every call started with the same controlled urgency. A practiced calm honed over 8 years of navigating chaos on the streets of the city. At 10:42 a.m., that chaos was condensed into the narrow confines of Elm Street, a quiet residential lane lined with oak trees and parked cars, where seconds were stretching into an eternity. Inside the small, cluttered bungalow, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. Her patient, 82-year-old Arthur Hemmings, lay on the worn floral carpet between a coffee table and an overturned armchair. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale and clammy. A dark, ugly bruise was already blooming on his temple. Jessica's mind worked like a high-speed checklist: airway, breathing, circulation, the fundamentals. She knelt beside him, her voice a steady, reassuring murmur that cut through his dazed confusion. "Arthur, my name is Jessica. I'm a paramedic. We're going to take care of you. Can you tell me what happened?" His response was a weak groan, his eyes struggling to focus. Jessica didn't need an answer. The scene told the story: a misplaced rug, a walker lying on its side, a man's life suddenly hanging by a thread. Her partner, David Miller, a lanky, sharp-eyed EMT with a knack for managing frantic family members, was already setting up the cardiac monitor and the oxygen tank. They worked in a seamless, unspoken rhythm, a partnership built on hundreds of calls just like this one. "BP is 90/50 and dropping," David announced, his voice tight. "Heart rate's thready at 120. Hypovolemic shock. Possible internal bleeding." Jessica's hands were a blur of efficient motion. She expertly inserted an IV line into the back of Arthur's fragile hand, taping it down with practiced precision. Every action was deliberate, designed to stabilize him for the critical journey to the trauma center. The golden hour, that precious window to prevent irreversible damage, had already started ticking down. Outside, the world was a different problem. Their ambulance. Unit 73 was a large, cumbersome vehicle, and Elm Street was unforgiving. The only way to get their gurney and all the necessary equipment to Arthur's front door without a long. Dangerous carry was to park directly in front of the house. It meant the rear of the ambulance angled out, effectively blocking the entire street. It was an unavoidable necessity, a choice made every day by first responders across the country, a temporary traffic inconvenience in exchange for a chance to save a life. The vehicle's emergency lights were a silent, strobing testament to the urgency within the home, a universal signal that meant emergency in progress. Stay clear. David had placed orange traffic cones behind the vehicle, but it was a token gesture. No one was getting through. He knew it, and he knew it was a calculated risk. As he brought the gurney to the front door, he glanced up the street. A small line of cars had already formed, their drivers patient for now. But patience, he knew, was a finite resource in the city. Inside, Jessica was preparing the cervical collar. "Let's get the backboard ready," she said to David as he maneuvered the gurney into the tight living room. "On my count, we'll log roll him, easy and slow. 1, 2, 3. They moved as one unit, securing Arthur to the board with practiced efficiency, immobilizing his spine to prevent further injury. The cardiac monitor beeped a steady, worrying rhythm. His blood pressure wasn't responding to the IV fluids as quickly as she'd hoped. They needed to move. Now. "All right, let's get him loaded. We're going to University Hospital," Jessica commanded. her focus entirely on the man on the gurney. "David, you call it in. Tell them we have a geriatric fall with a probable head injury and signs of shock. ETA 10 minutes. As David reached for his radio, a new sound cut through the air from outside. It wasn't the patient hum of waiting car engines. It was the sharp, aggressive blast of a car horn, followed by another, then another. A furious, impatient symphony that grated on the nerves. Jessica's jaw tightened. She had no time for this. Arthur Hemmings had no time for this. David peered out the front window. "Jess, we've got a problem," he said, his voice low. "There's a police cruiser at the back of the line, and the officer is out of his car." Jessica took a deep breath, pushing down a surge of frustration. This wasn't uncommon. Sometimes, officers arrived to help with traffic control or scene security. But the angry honking suggested this wasn't a friendly visit. She focused back on her patient. The monitor beeped faster. His condition was deteriorating. "Ignore it," she said, her voice firm. "The patient is the only thing that matters right now. Let's move." Together, they lifted the gurney and began the careful, coordinated dance of navigating it out of the cramped house and down the 2 concrete steps to the sidewalk. The flashing red and white lights of their ambulance washed over them, illuminating the tense scene that was unfolding on the street. The line of cars was longer now, and standing beside a black and white patrol car, his arms crossed and his face a mask of undisguised fury, was a police officer. He was young, with a severe, military-style haircut, and he was walking toward them. His expression made it clear he wasn't there to help. He was there to make a point. And for some reason, on this bright, sunny morning, he had decided that their life-saving mission was nothing more than a personal inconvenience. Officer Mark Corbin's day had been a slow drip of minor irritations, a pointless domestic dispute that was just shouting, a shoplifting call where the suspect was long gone, and endless traffic citations that earned him nothing but surly glares. At 34, with 6 years on the force, Corbin saw the world through a lens of rigid order. There were rules, and there was chaos. His job was to enforce the rules and beat back the chaos. To him, a blocked street wasn't a medical necessity. It was a breakdown of order. It was chaos, and it infuriated him. He had been just 2 blocks away, heading back toward the main boulevard, when he saw the backed-up traffic on Elm. As he got closer, he saw the source, an ambulance, parked at an arrogant angle, its lights flashing with a self-importance that grated on his last nerve. He laid on his horn, a long, hard blast meant to convey his authority. Move, now. When nothing happened, he did it again. His rookie partner, Officer Evans, a quiet 25-year-old just 6 months out of the academy, shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat. "Sir, maybe we should just go around. We can take the next block over." Corbin shot him a venomous look. "Go around? We don't go around. We're the police. They're blocking a public thoroughfare. They move." He threw the cruiser into park, the tires chirping in protest. "Stay here." He swung the door open and strode down the line of cars, the sun glinting off the polished badge on his chest. He felt the eyes of the other drivers on him, and it fueled his sense of purpose. They were stuck, annoyed, and he was their avenger, the one who would restore order. He saw the 2 paramedics finally emerging from the house, moving a gurney with an old man strapped to it. He didn't see a patient in critical condition. He saw a convenient excuse. As Jessica and David carefully lowered the gurney onto the sidewalk, Corbin closed the distance, his voice booming across the small space between them. "You the driver of this ambulance?" he barked, not at anyone in particular, but at the situation itself. David, busy securing the gurney's straps for the lift, looked up, startled by the officer's aggressive tone. "We're a little busy here. Officer, we'll be out of your way in just a minute." Corbin planted his feet, blocking their path to the ambulance's rear doors. "A minute isn't good enough. You're illegally blocking a public street. I want this vehicle moved right now." Jessica, her attention still primarily on the cardiac monitor attached to the gurney, looked up at him. She saw the clenched jaw, the rigid posture. This wasn't a request, it was a challenge. She kept her voice level, professional, the same tone she used to calm panicked families. "Officer, we have a critical patient. He's an 82-year-old man with a potential head bleed. We had to park this way to facilitate extraction. We are leaving for the hospital momentarily." She thought the explanation, clear, concise, and professional, would be enough. She was wrong. To Officer Corbin, her calm explanation sounded like defiance. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. "I don't care what you had to do. I'm giving you a lawful order. Move this truck. Now." His voice was low and menacing. David stepped forward slightly, trying to run interference. "Look, man, we can't. The patient is unstable. We have to load him and go. We're talking about a life here." "You're talking about obstructing traffic," Corbin snapped back. His eyes fixed on Jessica. He saw her as the one in charge, the one challenging his authority. The fact that she was a woman, calm and unflinching in the face of his aggression, seemed to fuel his anger. He felt a hot surge of resentment. He was the one with the badge and the gun. He was the one who gave the orders on the street. Jessica stood her ground, her 5'6" frame seeming to radiate an authority that had nothing to do with a uniform. It was the authority of competence, of life or death responsibility. And I am telling you, as a licensed paramedic in the middle of a medical emergency, that we have a legal and ethical duty to our patient. Moving the vehicle right now would delay his access to definitive care and endanger his life. We will not be moving the vehicle. We will be loading our patient. She turned her back on him, a clear dismissal, and motioned for David. Let's get him in. That was the breaking point. For Corbin, her turning away was the ultimate act of disrespect. It was a public refutation of his power. In his mind, she wasn't a medical professional making a critical decision. She was a civilian telling a cop no, and that was a line that could not be crossed. Hey! He shouted, his voice cracking with rage. He lunged forward and grabbed Jessica's arm, spinning her around to face him. You don't walk away from me. You are interfering with a police officer. The sudden, aggressive physical contact sent a jolt through Jessica. Her training screamed at her to remain calm, not to escalate, but a flicker of disbelief and anger flashed in her eyes. Get your hands off me, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. David yelled, What the hell are you doing? She's a paramedic! The small crowd of onlookers, who had been watching from their cars and front porches, gasped. Officer Evans, seeing the situation spiral out of control, quickly got out of the patrol car and started jogging toward them, his face a mask of alarm. Corbin ignored them all. His world had narrowed to Jessica's defiant face. You're obstructing, he hissed, his grip tightening on her arm. You were given a lawful order and you refused it. That's an arrestable offense. Jessica stared at him, incredulous. The beeping of the cardiac monitor beside them was a frantic, urgent soundtrack to the unfolding madness. You can't be serious, she said, her voice laced with disbelief. My patient is dying, and you're going to arrest me? You should have thought of that before you decided you were above the law. Corbin snarled. He reached for his belt with his free hand. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. He was actually doing it, right there, on the sunny pavement of Elm Street, next to a gurney holding a critically injured man with a dozen people watching. Officer Mark Corbin was choosing his ego over a human life. He pulled out his handcuffs, the metallic click echoing in the suddenly silent street. The flashing lights of the ambulance painted his furious face in strobing shades of red and white, transforming him from an officer of the law into an agent of pure, irrational chaos. Time seemed to warp, slowing down and sharpening into a series of hyper-detailed, surreal moments. The glint of sunlight on the steel handcuffs, the faint, desperate beep of the cardiac monitor, the feel of Officer Corbin's fingers digging into the flesh of her arm. Jessica Russo's mind, a place usually filled with medical protocols and drug dosages, was now reeling with a single, overwhelming thought. This isn't happening. Sir, you need to stop and think about what you are doing, she said, her voice miraculously steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She kept her hands open and visible, a clear sign of non-aggression. You are actively preventing a patient from receiving life-saving medical care. This is illegal. It's called obstruction of emergency medical services. She was appealing to his reason, to the law he claimed to be upholding. But Officer Corbin was far beyond reason. He interpreted her knowledge of the law not as a valid point, but as a further challenge. Don't you dare lecture me on the law, he spat, yanking her arm harder. You're the one committing a crime. Now turn around. David Miller moved between them, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Officer, for God's sake, listen to her. We're losing him. He gestured frantically toward Arthur Hemmings, whose face had taken on a grayish pallor. Just let us load him. We'll be gone. You can write us 1,000 tickets. Just let us go. Corbin shoved David back with his free hand. Stay out of this, or you'll be in cuffs next. From down the street, his partner, Officer Evans, finally reached them, breathing heavily. Corbin, what's going on? Let's just calm down. The rookie's eyes were wide with panic. He could see the patient on the gurney, the furious set of his partner's jaw, and the horrified faces of the civilian witnesses. He knew, with the sickening certainty of a subordinate watching his superior implode, that this was a career-ending mistake in progress. I'm handling it, Evans, Corbin snapped, not taking his eyes off Jessica. This paramedic thinks she runs my street. I'm teaching her a lesson. The phrase hung in the air, thick and damning. Teaching her a lesson. It stripped away any pretense of lawful procedure. This was personal. It was a power trip, raw and ugly. Jessica saw the futility of arguing. He was committed. She made a split-second decision. Her patient was the priority. A physical struggle would only delay things further, and Arthur didn't have another minute to spare. With a deep, steadying breath, she stopped resisting. Fine, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She slowly turned and placed her hands behind her back. It was an act of profound sacrifice, choosing to endure this humiliation to end the standoff for her patient's sake. She hoped that her compliance would speed this insane process up, that David could get Arthur to the hospital while she dealt with this absurdity. Corbin took her compliance as a victory. A smirk touched his lips as he pushed her forward, forcing her to bend over the hood of a nearby parked sedan. The metal was hot from the morning sun. He wrenched her arms back at an awkward angle, causing a sharp pain to shoot through her shoulder, and snapped the first cuff onto her right wrist. The cold metal bit into her skin. A woman watching from her front porch screamed, "What are you doing to her? She's trying to help that poor man!" Corbin ignored her. He was in his own world, a world where he was the sole arbiter of justice. As he secured the second cuff, he leaned in close to Jessica's ear, his voice a low, triumphant whisper. See? Everybody follows the rules eventually. The indignity of it was a physical blow. to be treated like a criminal, to be restrained in public while on duty, in the middle of a call. It was a violation of everything she stood for. She could feel the stares of the onlookers, a mixture of pity and outrage. She squeezed her eyes shut for a second, fighting back a wave of helpless fury. David Miller watched, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He was torn between intervening and likely getting arrested himself, leaving Arthur completely abandoned and doing the only thing he could. He grabbed his radio from his belt clip. "Dispatch, this is Unit 73, he said, his voice shaking with anger. "I have an emergency. We are on scene on Elm Street. A police officer is obstructing our patient care. He has my partner, paramedic Russo, in handcuffs. I repeat, a police officer has arrested my partner on scene. We require immediate assistance from an EMS supervisor and a police supervisor. Now!" The radio crackled in response, the dispatcher's voice suddenly sharp with alarm. 10-4, Unit 73. A police sergeant and an EMS supervisor are being dispatched to your location immediately. Stand by. The words police sergeant seemed to momentarily pierce Corbin's bubble of self-righteousness. A flicker of something, doubt, perhaps, crossed his face. He looked up and saw his partner, Evans, staring at him, his expression one of utter dismay. He saw the witnesses, several of them now recording with their phones, and he heard the frantic call David had just made. He had crossed a line, a bright, uncrossable line. He had arrested a paramedic during a medical emergency, and the consequences, he was beginning to realize, were now racing toward him. Their sirens screaming. He tightened his grip on Jessica's arm and began marching her toward his patrol car, as if completing the arrest would somehow validate the decision to make it. Jessica stumbled slightly, her balance thrown off by her cuffed hands. Behind them, abandoned on the sidewalk, Arthur Hemmings's cardiac monitor continued its lonely, desperate vigil, its beeps a frantic, fading cry for help that its primary caregiver was now powerless to provide. The wail of an approaching siren sliced through the tense atmosphere on Elm Street. It was a different sound from the ambulance's rhythmic whoop. It was the assertive, rising and falling yelp of a police vehicle moving at speed. For Officer Mark Corbin, it was the sound of impending judgment. For everyone else, it was the sound of potential rescue. He had Jessica halfway to his cruiser, his hand clamped firmly on her upper arm. Each step felt heavier than the last as the reality of his actions began to settle in. The outrage from the small crowd of neighbors was palpable. Their glares felt like physical blows. His own partner, Officer Evans, stood frozen near the ambulance, his face pale, looking like a man who had just witnessed a car crash in slow motion. "Get in the car," Corbin ordered Jessica, pulling open the rear door of his cruiser. "No," she said, planting her feet. Her voice was quiet but unbreakable. "I'm not going anywhere. My patient is right there. My place is with him." Even in handcuffs, she was still a paramedic first. Corbin's face flushed with a fresh wave of anger at her continued defiance. "You've lost that right. Get in the car." Before he could try to force her, a black and white police SUV screeched to a halt behind his cruiser, blocking him in. The door flew open and Sergeant Ava Rostova emerged. She was a woman in her late 40s, with a steely gaze and a no-nonsense demeanor that had been forged over 2 decades on the force. She didn't run or shout. She moved with a deliberate, powerful authority that immediately commanded the scene. Her eyes swept over the tableau, the ambulance, the gurney on the sidewalk, the cuffed paramedic, and her own 2 officers, one furious and the other terrified. "Corbin, what in God's name is going on here?" Rostova's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a razor blade, instantly silencing the murmurs of the crowd. Corbin let go of Jessica's arm as if it were burning hot. He turned to face his superior, his posture immediately shifting from aggressor to a defensive subordinate. "Sarge, I've got this under control. This individual was obstructing a public roadway and refused a lawful order to move her vehicle." He gestured toward Jessica with a dismissive flick of his hand, refusing to even call her a paramedic. Rostova's eyes narrowed. She ignored Corbin and walked directly to Jessica. She took in the uniform, the EMS patches, and the handcuffs biting into her wrists. She looked at the gurney, at the elderly man whose skin was now a waxy, translucent white. She could hear the faint, rapid beeping of the cardiac monitor. "Are you paramedic Russo?" she asked, her voice professional and calm. "Yes, Sergeant," Jessica replied, relief washing over her. This was a real cop, a supervisor. Sanity had arrived. "And this is your patient?" "Yes, Arthur Hemmings, 82. Fall with head trauma, currently in hypotensive shock. We were loading him for transport to university when your officer intervened." She delivered the information with clinical precision, her training overriding the humiliation of her position. Rostova's gaze was unflinching. She then turned her attention to David Miller, who was hovering anxiously near the gurney. "And you are her partner?" "Yes." "Sergeant, EMT David Miller, this is insane. He arrested her for doing her job. Our patient is crashing." Rostova held up a hand to calm him. Her focus snapped back to Corbin, and the temperature on the street seemed to drop by 10 degrees. "Officer Corbin," she said, her voice dangerously level, "explain to me, in detail, why you felt it was appropriate to place a uniformed, on-duty paramedic in handcuffs during the active care of a critical patient." Corbin swallowed hard. The confidence he'd worn like armor just minutes ago was gone, replaced by a desperate bluster. "She was belligerent, Sarge. She refused a direct order. It's obstruction, plain and simple. I was clearing the road." "You were clearing the road?" Rostova repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. She gestured to the quiet residential street. "This is Elm Street, not the interstate. And that," she pointed a finger at the gurney, "is a human being whose life depends on this paramedic's care. Did you at any point assess the medical situation before you put your hands on her?" My priority was the traffic violation," Corbin stammered, the weakness of his own excuse becoming apparent even to him as he said it aloud. Just then, another vehicle arrived, an EMS supervisor's SUV. A man in a white uniform shirt, Captain Thorne, jumped out and rushed toward the scene, his face a grim mask of concern. He saw Jessica in cuffs and his expression hardened into one of cold fury. "What the hell is this?" Thorne demanded, his voice echoing Rostova's. He looked directly at the sergeant. "Eva, what is going on? I got a call one of my medics was arrested on a call." Rostova held his gaze. "I'm handling it. Tom. But it appears to be exactly what you heard." She turned back to Corbin, her decision made. She looked at Officer Evans, the rookie, who had been standing by, silent and wide-eyed. "Evans," she commanded, "give me your cuff key." Evans fumbled at his belt, his hands shaking slightly as he produced the key. Rostova took it and walked back to Jessica. "Officer Corbin made a catastrophic error in judgment. Paramedic Russo. I am correcting it right now. I apologize for his conduct." With two quick, decisive clicks, the handcuffs fell away from Jessica's wrists. She brought her hands forward, rubbing the deep red welts the steel had left behind. A wave of dizziness hit her as the adrenaline began to recede, but she pushed it down. She turned, her focus immediately snapping back to the only thing that mattered. "My patient," she said, her voice raspy. She rushed back to the gurney, her brief, terrifying ordeal as a prisoner already forgotten. The law had arrived, but for Arthur Hemmings, the clock had never stopped ticking. With the handcuffs off, Jessica was a study in pure, unadulterated focus. She instantly reassessed Arthur's vitals. The monitor was painting a grim picture. His blood pressure had fallen further, and his heart rate was spiking erratically. The delay, though only a few minutes long, had cost them dearly. His pressure is bottoming out. David, push another saline bolus. Wide open, she ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. She grabbed a laryngoscope and an endotracheal tube from the kit. I think he's aspirating. We need to secure his airway before we move him. The scene had split into two distinct, parallel realities. On one side, Jessica and David worked feverishly over their patient, a bubble of intense medical urgency. Captain Thorne of the EMS stood by, watching his paramedics, his face a mixture of pride in their professionalism and cold fury at what had just transpired. On the other side was Sergeant Rostova's investigation. She had created her own bubble, one of methodical, clinical inquiry. She turned to Officer Corbin, her expression leaving no room for excuses or justifications. Her tone was no longer that of a supervisor correcting an officer, it was that of an investigator beginning to build a case. Officer Corbin, your body camera has been active this entire time, correct? She asked. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Corbin nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Yes, Sergeant. He knew what was on that footage. He had lived it, and he was just now beginning to understand how it would look to others, stripped of the red-hot anger that had fueled him. Good, Rostova said flatly. Now, walk me through it again. From the moment you arrived, you stated the paramedic was belligerent. Define that for me. What specific words did she use? What actions did she take that you interpreted as belligerent? She had a tone, Corbin began, already faltering. She dismissed me, said she wasn't moving. She turned her back on me when I was giving her an order. That's defiance. Rostova's gaze was like a physical weight. She is the paramedic in charge of a medical scene. Officer, her attention is supposed to be on her patient. Did she threaten you? Did she yell at you? Did she make any physically aggressive moves toward you before you laid hands on her? No, but her attitude... I'm not asking about her attitude, Corbin. I'm asking about her actions. Did her actions pose a threat to your safety or the safety of the public? The question cornered him. He knew the answer was no. The only threat on this street had been the medical emergency, a threat his actions had actively worsened. She was obstructing, he repeated, clinging to the word like a life raft. That was the crime. Rostova turned her attention to David Miller for a moment, who was now helping Jessica prepare to intubate. Mr. Miller, a quick question. At any point did you hear your partner, Paramedic Russo, threaten this officer or act in a belligerent manner? David didn't even look up from his task, his focus on holding Arthur's head in the correct position. No, he said, his voice tight with anger. She was calm. She was professional. She explained the situation. He refused to listen. He was the only one acting belligerent. He put his hands on her for no reason. Rostova's eyes flicked back to Corbin. The contradiction was stark, and she had a dozen witnesses and a body camera to confirm which version was the truth. She then looked at the rookie, Officer Evans, who had been standing silently, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. Officer Evans, Rostova said, her voice softening slightly but still firm. You were present for the entire interaction. Give me your statement. What did you observe? Evans looked from his partner to his sergeant, his face a miserable portrait of a man trapped between loyalty and the truth. He was new. He knew the unspoken rule. You back your partner. But he also knew what he had seen. He had seen a gross abuse of power that had shocked him to his core. He took a deep breath. "Sarge, we pulled up, and Officer Corbin was angry about the traffic." He got out of the car. He was yelling. The paramedic. She tried to explain they had a critical patient. She was calm. She asked him to let them work. He just got angrier. He said he was teaching her a lesson. Then he arrested her. The words came out in a quiet, damning rush. Evans couldn't meet Corbin's eyes. Corbin's face went white. His own partner. The rookie he was supposed to be training. The betrayal, in his mind, was absolute. "He's new, Sarge. He doesn't understand." "He understands what he saw. Corbin." Rostova cut him off, her patience gone. "And what he saw is what every single person on this street saw." She pointed to the phone in the hand of a man standing on his lawn. "It's what he recorded." She pointed to her own chest. "It's what my camera is recording right now, and it's what your camera recorded." She took a step closer to Corbin, her voice dropping to a low, intense growl. "You didn't just make a mistake. You didn't just show bad judgment. You abandoned your post as a peace officer and became a menace. You endangered a civilian's life. You assaulted a fellow first responder. And you disgraced this badge. You created this lie that she was the aggressor, and it fell apart in less than 5 minutes." She turned away from him, her disgust palpable. The deconstruction was complete. There was no ambiguity, no gray area. There was only the truth. And the truth was about to bring the full weight of the system down on Officer Mark Corbin's head. While Sergeant Rostova was systematically dismantling Corbin's narrative, Jessica Russo was fighting to pull Arthur Hemmings back from the brink. The intubation was successful. A breathing tube was now secured, ensuring a clear path for oxygen to his lungs. The readings on the monitor stabilized slightly, but he was still in profound danger. "We need to go. Right now," Jessica said to Captain Thorne, who had been coordinating a second ambulance to the scene. "Unit 75 is 2 minutes out." "Jess," he replied. "They'll take over transport. You and David are witnesses now. You're done for the day." "No," Jessica said immediately, shaking her head. "He's my patient. I started this call. I'm finishing it. I'll ride with 75 to the hospital. David can give the preliminary report to the new crew." It was non-negotiable. Her duty to Arthur superseded everything else. The arrest, the humiliation, the anger. Thorne looked at her, saw the granite resolve in her eyes, and nodded. "All right, your call. I'll clear it." As the new ambulance, Unit 75, pulled up, Sergeant Rostova concluded her on-scene business with brutal efficiency. She turned to Corbin and Evans, her voice radiating an authority that left no room for argument. "Corbin, Evans, both of you, hand me your radios. Now." Evans complied immediately, his relief almost visible. Corbin hesitated for a fraction of a second, a final, futile flicker of defiance, before unclipping the radio from his belt and handing it over. It was a symbolic gesture. They were being silenced, disconnected from the network, their power revoked. "You are both being removed from patrol duties, effective immediately," Rostova stated, her voice cold and official. "You will report directly to the precinct. You will go to the quiet room and you will wait for a representative from Internal Affairs to arrive. You will not speak to each other. You will not speak to anyone else. Is that understood?" "Sarge, this is—" Corbin started, but Rostova cut him off with a look that could freeze fire. "That was not a request, officer. It was a direct order. Now confirm you understand it." "Understood," Corbin ground out through clenched teeth. "Understood. "Sergeant," Evans said quietly. Rostova's attention then turned to Corbin's chest, specifically to the small black box of the body camera. "Officer Corbin, you will not touch that camera. You will not turn it off. You will not attempt to access the footage. When you get to the precinct, a technician from the evidence unit will remove it from your person and log it into evidence. Any deviation from that procedure will result in an immediate charge of tampering with evidence. Do you understand that as well?" The threat was clear and severe. That footage was no longer his. It was the primary evidence in a case being built against him. "I understand," he muttered, his gaze fixed on the pavement. As the new paramedic crew from Unit 75 took over the gurney, Jessica gave them a quick, professional handoff report, her voice a stream of medical data and observations. She then climbed into the back of their ambulance without a moment's hesitation, her place once again beside her patient. As the doors closed, she caught a final glimpse of the scene. Officer Corbin, stripped of his radio, standing defeated on the side of the road, Sergeant Rostova directing traffic with crisp, efficient gestures, and the neighbors, still watching, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning relief. Rostova watched the ambulance pull away, its siren finally clearing a path down Elm Street. Her primary duty, ensuring the medical emergency could proceed, was complete. Now, her secondary duty began, containment and accountability. She walked over to EMS Captain Thorne. "Tom, I need formal statements from both Russo and Miller as soon as they're available. I also need a copy of their patient care report. The city attorney's office is going to want to see everything." "You'll get it," Thorne said, his voice grim. "And my chief is going to want to have a conversation with your chief before the end of the hour. This can't be swept under the rug." "Ava." "It won't be," Rostova assured him. "I'm on my way to the precinct now to personally file the preliminary incident report. I'm recommending immediate suspension for Corbin pending the internal affairs investigation." She then turned to the half-dozen witnesses who were still lingering. She took out her notepad. "Ma'am, sir, I'm Sergeant Rostova. I'm going to need to get your names and phone numbers. An investigator will be in contact with you shortly." One by one, they gave their information, many of them adding their own unsolicited, angry commentary. It was disgusting what he did. She was so calm, and he was a bully. "I got the whole thing on my phone if you need it." "We will," Rostova said, pocketing her notebook. She returned to her SUV, but before getting in, she made one last stop. She walked over to Corbin's patrol car and took the keys from the ignition. He and Evans would not be driving themselves back to the precinct. They would be taken by another unit, like suspects. The symbolism was intentional. Her final act on Elm Street was to key her own radio. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Rostova. The scene at 125 Elm Street is clear. Show officers Corbin and Evans as 10-7 out of service. I will be en route to the precinct to file a 1098 report." A 1098 was the code for a significant incident report. As she drove away, she knew this was more than just a report. It was the opening salvo in a war that was about to erupt between the police department, the fire department's EMS division, and the city's lawyers. Officer Corbin's 5 minutes of unrestrained ego had lit a fuse, and the explosion was going to be massive. The consequences were no longer just for him. They were for the entire department. The moment Sergeant Rostova's patrol car pulled away from Elm Street, the incident transformed from a street-level crisis into an institutional firestorm. On her way back to the precinct, she used her vehicle's encrypted messaging system to send a preliminary alert directly to her commanding officer. Captain Miller, a grizzled veteran who had seen nearly everything. The message was concise and explosive. Use of force incident involving on-duty paramedic. Officer arrested medic during critical patient care. Officer Corbin, badge number 734. On-scene evidence and multiple witnesses confirm medic was compliant. Body cam footage secured. Recommending immediate suspension. Details to follow. Captain Miller's office was on the top floor of the precinct, a space usually filled with the dull hum of bureaucracy. When the message flashed across his screen, he felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was the kind of incident that chiefs got fired over. He immediately picked up his phone, his first call not to internal affairs, but to the top of the chain. Police Chief Frank Donovan was in a budget meeting at City Hall when his private line buzzed. He saw it was Miller and excused himself. This had better be important. "Mike," he said, stepping into the hallway. "It is, Chief." Miller's voice was grim. "We have a code red situation. One of our officers, Mark Corbin, just arrested an EMS paramedic in the middle of a call. Put her in cuffs, on camera, in front of about 20 civilians." There was a moment of dead silence on the line. Donovan felt a surge of hot, visceral anger. Corbin. He knew the name. An officer with a reputation for being a hothead, with a handful of informal complaints that had never stuck. "Tell me you're joking," Donovan said, his voice dangerously low. "I wish I were, Chief. Sergeant Rostova was the responding supervisor. She de-escalated, released the medic, and has Corbin and his rookie partner on ice at the precinct, but the damage is done. The EMS supervisor on scene is Tom Thorne." Donovan swore under his breath. Thorne was a bulldog, fiercely protective of his people, and he was close to his own boss, EMS Fire Chief Wallace. This wasn't just a problem anymore. It was a declaration of war. "Where's the footage?" "Rostova is filing the report now. The camera is being logged into evidence as we speak." "Lock it down," Donovan ordered. "I want one copy made for IA and one copy sent directly and securely to the city attorney's office. Nobody else sees it until we do. And get Corbin and his partner into separate rooms with IA investigators yesterday. I want their preliminary statements before the union reps can coach them into a corner." He hung up, his mind already racing through the catastrophic implications. Meanwhile, at the EMS headquarters across town, Captain Thorne had already made his own call. EMS Fire Chief Brenda Wallace, a sharp, politically savvy leader, listened to Thorne's furious blow-by-blow account without interruption. When he finished, her voice was glacial. He put his hands on her while she was providing patient care, cuffed her. Brenda marched her toward his car. If Rostova hadn't shown up when she did, God knows what would have happened. The patient was crashing the whole time. It was the most unprofessional, dangerous thing I've ever seen. "I'm calling Donovan," Wallace said, her decision absolute. "This isn't an internal matter for them to handle quietly. This is an assault on one of our own and an attack on the entire system of public safety in this city. If our medics aren't safe from the police, then nobody is." The phone call between the two chiefs was brief and brutal. Wallace laid out her position in no uncertain terms. "Frank, I have a paramedic who was assaulted and unlawfully detained by one of your officers while she was trying to save a man's life. I don't want a lengthy investigation that ends with a slap on the wrist. I want that officer's badge, and I want it by the end of the week, and I want to know what you're going to do to make sure this never, ever happens again." Chief Donovan, knowing he had no leverage, could only promise a swift and thorough investigation. "Brenda, you have my word. I'm looking at the footage myself this afternoon. If it's what you say it is, his career is over. We'll handle it." "You'd better." "Frank," Wallace said, her voice dropping the last vestiges of professional courtesy. "Because my paramedic, Jessica Russo, is a damn hero. She went right back to work and saved that man's life after being publicly humiliated and assaulted by one of yours. My report to the mayor's office is going to reflect that. And it's going to ask why your department employs officers who are a danger to the public and to other first responders." She hung up, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Back at the precinct, the firestorm was just beginning to gather strength. Sergeant Rostova's incident report, designated a Level 1 priority, had been electronically distributed to the captain, the head of internal affairs, and the department's legal liaison. Phones began ringing all over the building. The head of the police union was already on his way, demanding access to his officers. Internal affairs investigators were pulling Corbin's entire service record, looking for patterns. In a small, windowless room, Officer Mark Corbin sat alone, the adrenaline of the morning replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He had been so sure of himself, so certain in his authority. Now, stripped of his radio, his gun, and his power, he was just a man in a uniform waiting for the system he had weaponized to turn its full, unforgiving force upon him. He had thought he was teaching a paramedic a lesson. He was about to learn that the real lesson was just beginning, and he was the student. By 3 p.m., the key players were assembled in the precinct's command conference room, a sterile space dominated by a large flat-screen monitor. The mood was funereal. At the head of the polished table sat Police Chief Frank Donovan, his face grim. To his right was Captain Miller and the head of Internal Affairs, Lieutenant Jacobs. To his left sat Eleanor Vance, a senior attorney from the city's legal department. Her expression sharp and analytical. She had been pulled out of a deposition for this, a clear sign of the severity of the situation. Sergeant Rostova stood quietly by the door, having already given her verbal briefing. "Let's see it," Donovan said, his voice low. A technician dimmed the lights, and the footage began to play. The screen flickered to life, showing the world from the center of Officer Mark Corbin's chest. The audio was crystal clear. The initial images were jarringly mundane. The dashboard of the patrol car, the view of backed-up traffic on a sunny street. Then came Corbin's voice, laced with irritation, followed by the sound of the car door slamming. The camera bounced as he strode down the street, his heavy footsteps audible. The confrontation with the paramedics was raw and unfiltered. The camera captured David Miller's reasonable tone and Jessica Russo's calm. Professional explanation. Then, it captured Corbin's escalating anger, his voice growing louder, more aggressive. "I don't care what you had to do," his voice snarled from the speakers. "I'm giving you a lawful order. Move this truck, now." Eleanor Vance, the city attorney, made a note on her legal pad, her pen scratching loudly in the silent room. This was the first critical failure. The order itself was arguably unlawful, as state law granted emergency vehicles latitude when actively engaged in a medical response. The footage continued. The camera jerked as Corbin lunged forward, grabbing Jessica's arm. The audio picked up her sharp intake of breath and David's enraged shout. The most damning moment came next, the audio capturing Corbin's voice, dripping with malice, as he leaned toward Jessica. "I'm teaching her a lesson." A collective intake of breath could be heard in the room. That single phrase obliterated any possible defense of procedural correctness. It was an admission of intent, not to enforce the law, but to punish and humiliate. Chief Donovan stared at the screen, his hands clenched into fists on the table. He watched his officer, his uniform, his badge, become a symbol of petty tyranny. The camera recorded the click of the handcuffs, Jessica's pained grunt as her arm was twisted, and the horrified reactions of the civilian witnesses. It was a complete, unmitigated disaster, captured in high-definition video and audio. When Sergeant Rostova's voice cut in, sharp and authoritative, the tension in the room shifted. Her on-screen presence was a stark contrast to Corbin's chaotic rage. She was controlled, methodical, and her questions systematically exposed the absurdity of his actions. The video ended with the ambulance pulling away and Rostova beginning to take witness statements. The technician turned the lights back up. The screen went black, but the images remained, burned into the minds of everyone in the room. There was a long, heavy silence. Eleanor Vance was the first to speak, her voice devoid of emotion. "Well," she said, looking down at her notes, "that's about as bad as it gets." She looked up at Chief Donovan. "From a legal standpoint, we are in a position of zero defensibility. The officer's order to move the vehicle was likely unlawful under the circumstances. His use of force was objectively unreasonable. The physical contact constitutes battery. The arrest constitutes false imprisonment and a clear violation of the paramedic's Fourth Amendment rights. His statement about teaching her a lesson is a prosecutor's dream for proving malice, and we have it all on our own camera." She tapped her pen on the pad. "There will be a lawsuit. It will be a federal civil rights lawsuit, and we will lose it. The only question is how much it will cost the city's taxpayers." Lieutenant Jacobs from Internal Affairs chimed in, his voice gravelly. His partner, Evans, corroborated the paramedic's entire story. Said Corbin was the aggressor from the moment he stepped out of the car. We've also pulled Corbin's service record. 3 informal complaints of excessive verbal force, 1 for an overly aggressive traffic stop. Nothing ever stuck. No formal discipline. But now, this footage gives context to that pattern. He's a liability. Chief Donovan finally spoke, his voice heavy with a weary anger. He looked at Captain Miller. "Is he still in the building?" "Yes. Chief, in IA interview room 2. His union rep is with him." "Suspend him," Donovan ordered, his decision absolute. "Unpaid administrative leave, effective immediately. I want his gun, I want his badge, and I want him escorted out of this building by the end of the hour. Same for Evans, pending a full review of his conduct for failure to intervene. But his is paid leave for now. He cooperated." He then looked at Eleanor Vance. "What's our next move?" "We need to get ahead of this," the attorney said, already in crisis management mode. "The EMS fire chief has likely already briefed the mayor. We need to do the same. We need to issue a public statement acknowledging a serious incident has occurred and that a full investigation is underway. And we need to reach out to the paramedics union. A quiet, early settlement is our only hope of containing the financial damage. But I suspect it's too late. That footage is a public records request waiting to happen. Once it gets out, this city is going to explode." Donovan stood up, the meeting over. The unblinking eye of the camera had shown them the truth. It wasn't a case of a misunderstanding or a gray area. It was a clear, unambiguous abuse of power. And now, the long and painful process of dealing with the fallout was about to begin. The images on the screen had sealed Officer Corbin's fate, and in doing so, had thrown the entire police department into crisis. The atmosphere in the internal affairs wing of the precinct was thick with a sterile, bureaucratic tension. Officer Mark Corbin sat at a small metal table in a windowless interview room, the muted colors of the walls seeming to press in on him. Across from him sat 2 IA investigators, Lieutenant Jacobs and a stern-faced sergeant he didn't know. His union representative, a portly, world-weary man named Don, sat beside him, occasionally scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. The confidence Corbin had wielded on Elm Street was gone, replaced by a sullen, defensive posture. He had already given his version of the events, a heavily edited narrative where he was the calm professional and Jessica Russo was an uncooperative obstructionist. It was a story that had crumbled to dust the moment the investigators mentioned the body camera. "Officer Corbin," Lieutenant Jacobs said, his voice a low, rumbling monotone as he reviewed his notes. Let's go back to your decision to use physical force. You stated that the paramedic was uncooperative, yet the footage shows her standing still, explaining her medical obligations. Where was the immediate threat that justified putting your hands on her? The threat was to public order, Corbin said, his voice strained. The road was blocked. She refused to comply. I used a standard control hold to effect an arrest for obstruction. Did you consider any de-escalation tactics? The other investigator asked. Did you, for example, ask about the patient's condition? Did you offer to assist with traffic control to expedite their departure? Did you consult a supervisor before making a physical arrest? There wasn't time, Corbin insisted. The situation was escalating. Don, the union rep, cleared his throat. My officer made a judgment call in a dynamic situation. Jacobs cut him off with a raised hand, his eyes never leaving Corbin. The footage shows the only person escalating the situation was you. Officer, it also recorded you stating your intention was to teach her a lesson. Was that part of your training? To use your authority for personal retribution? Corbin's face darkened. That's not what I meant. It was taken out of context. Then give us the context. Jacobs pressed. What is the proper context for a police officer declaring he's going to teach a paramedic a lesson right before he wrongfully arrests her and abandons her dying patient on a sidewalk? Corbin had no answer. He just stared at the table. The lie was too big to maintain, and the evidence was too absolute. He could see the disbelief and contempt in the investigator's eyes. They weren't trying to understand his side. They were simply documenting his career's implosion. The interview ended shortly after. Jacobs closed his notebook. Officer Corbin, as of this moment, you are placed on immediate unpaid administrative suspension pending the outcome of this investigation and a disciplinary hearing. You will turn in your badge, your service weapon, and all other department-issued equipment. You are not to enter any police facility unless specifically ordered to do so. You are not to have any contact with any witnesses in this case, including Officer Evans and the paramedics involved. A violation of any of these terms will result in your immediate termination. The words hit him like a physical blow, unpaid suspension. It was the first step toward being fired. Don, his union rep, began to argue about procedure, but it was half-hearted. He knew this was a losing battle. The evidence was insurmountable. A uniformed officer escorted Corbin to his locker. He moved like a man in a trance, his colleagues turning away or suddenly finding something interesting to look at on their desks as he passed. The camaraderie of the precinct had evaporated. He was no longer one of them. He was a problem to be excised. He methodically stripped his gear from his duty belt, the holster, the magazine pouches, the taser. He placed his Glock 19 on the counter, followed by his badge. The small, polished piece of metal felt impossibly heavy. It had been the source of his identity, his power. Now it was just an object, a piece of evidence against him. A few doors down, Officer Evans was having a much different conversation. He recounted the events honestly, his voice quiet but steady. He admitted he was new, that he was intimidated by Corbin, but that he knew from the start that what his partner was doing was wrong. Why didn't you intervene, Officer Evans? Jacobs asked him, his tone less accusatory, more pedagogical. Evans looked down at his hands. I should have, sir. I froze. He's my training officer. I failed. I should have done more to stop him. It was the answer they were looking for, accountability. Jacobs nodded slowly. Your failure to act is a serious policy violation, and it will be addressed. But your honesty in this interview will be noted. You are being placed on paid administrative leave, pending a mandatory retraining and a fitness for duty evaluation. You'll turn in your weapon. But we're not taking your badge today. Don't make me regret that. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Evans whispered. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made him dizzy. Later that evening, Mark Corbin walked out the back door of the precinct in civilian clothes, a cardboard box with his personal effects in his hands. The badge was gone. The gun was gone. The authority was gone. He was just a man who had let his anger and his ego steer him off a cliff. He looked up at the setting sun, but all he could see was the flashing red and white lights of the ambulance. And all he could hear was the damning click of handcuffs and the final, terrible sound of his career being stripped away, one piece of polished metal at a time. Jessica Russo finished her shift in a state of numb exhaustion. After handing off Arthur Hemmings to the emergency room staff, his condition still critical but stabilized, thanks to her pre-hospital care, she and David had gone to a quiet EMS station to write their reports. They wrote everything down, every word spoken, every action taken, their accounts perfectly aligned. Captain Thorne met them there, along with a representative from their union, a woman named Maria Sanchez. Maria was a former paramedic herself, a sharp, fiercely protective woman who had seen her fair share of bureaucratic battles. She listened to Jessica's story with a deepening frown. "This is beyond an internal complaint, Jess," Maria said, her tone serious. "This wasn't just a cop having a bad day. This was a criminal act. He assaulted you, he illegally detained you, and he endangered your patient. The department will try to handle this internally, and the city will want to make this go away quietly. We can't let that happen." "I don't want this to happen to anyone else," Jessica said, her voice tired but firm. "That's all I care about. What he did was wrong. It can't just be forgotten." "It won't be," Maria assured her. "The union will back you 100%. We've already engaged our legal counsel. We recommend you pursue a civil case, not just for compensation, but for a public record of accountability. We need a court to officially declare that his actions were unlawful. It's the only way to force real change." Maria gave her the card of a lawyer. "His name is Ben Carter. He's the best civil rights attorney in the state. He specializes in cases of police misconduct. He's expecting your call." The next day, Jessica sat in the plush, book-lined office of Benjamin Carter. He was a tall, imposing man in his 50s with a calm, reassuring demeanor that belied a reputation as a tiger in the courtroom. He had already seen the police department's preliminary incident report, leaked to him by a source within the city. He had not yet seen the body cam footage, but he knew it was the key. "Jessica," he began after she recounted her story, "what you experienced was a profound violation on multiple levels. It was a violation of your civil rights under the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable seizure. It was a violation of state laws that explicitly protect emergency personnel from obstruction, and it was a violation of your basic human dignity." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "The city's lawyers are going to try to settle this quickly. They'll offer you a sum of money to sign a non-disclosure agreement and walk away. We will not be taking that offer. This isn't just about money. It's about sending a message that will reverberate through every police precinct in this country. You do not touch first responders. You do not interfere with medical care. There is a sacred line, and Officer Corbin didn't just cross it. He blew it up with dynamite." Carter's strategy was clear. "We will file a lawsuit in federal court," he explained. "We're not going through the state system. We're taking this to the federal level, citing a violation of U.S. Code, Title 42, Section 1983. That's the Civil Rights Act. It allows citizens to sue government officials for depriving them of their constitutional rights." Meanwhile, at the City Hall Legal Department, Eleanor Vance was having a very different conversation with a team of beleaguered city attorneys. The mayor was furious. The city council was panicking, and the media was starting to sniff around the story. "We have to assume the body cam footage will leak," Vance stated, pacing the room. "And when it does, our position becomes indefensible. I've reviewed Corbin's history. It's a classic case of a department failing to address a problem officer until it's too late. The plaintiff's attorney will argue that this wasn't just one officer's mistake, but a failure of the department's training and supervision. That opens us up to a monel claim, which means they can sue the city itself for having a policy or custom that led to the violation. That's where the damages get astronomical." Her recommendation was one of damage control. "We need to make an immediate, substantial settlement offer, something in the high six figures. We need to show that we are taking this seriously and trying to make it right." "And what if they refuse?" a junior attorney asked. Vance stopped pacing and looked at him. "Then we prepare for a very public, very expensive, and very embarrassing trial that we will almost certainly lose. We start pulling every training manual, every disciplinary file, and every use of force report from the last 10 years. Because that's what their lawyer, Ben Carter, is about to demand in discovery. And he will pick us apart, piece by piece, in front of a jury." The battle lines were drawn. On one side, Jessica Russo and a top-tier civil rights attorney, armed with an ironclad case and a moral imperative. On the other, a city and its police department, armed with taxpayer money and a desperate need to contain a scandal. In the middle was a piece of video evidence, a digital ghost that had captured a moment of pure injustice and was about to become the most valuable and most dangerous piece of data in the entire city. For a week, the Elm Street incident was a powder keg waiting for a spark. It was the subject of hushed, furious conversations within the police and fire departments, and a growing source of panic inside City Hall. The city's attorneys had extended a preliminary, confidential settlement offer of $750,000 to Jessica Russo's lawyer. It was summarily rejected. Ben Carter's response was a single sentence: "We will see you in federal court." The spark came on a Tuesday evening. An anonymous source, likely a disgruntled police officer or a City Hall insider who believed a cover-up was imminent, leaked a copy of Officer Corbin's body cam footage to a local investigative news journalist. At 6 p.m., the story led the evening news. A shocking video obtained exclusively by Channel 4 News shows a city police officer violently arresting a paramedic as she attempts to provide life-saving care to an elderly patient. The footage was grainy on the television screen, but its power was undiminished. The city watched, horrified, as the scene unfolded. They heard Corbin's aggressive, bullying tone. They heard Jessica's calm, professional pleas. They saw him grab her, saw her cuffed and humiliated. They heard his damning words, "I'm teaching her a lesson." The story exploded. The news station's website crashed from the traffic. The video went viral, ricocheting across social media platforms under hashtags like #ParamedicStrong and #JusticeForJessica. It was shared by nurses, doctors, firefighters, and paramedics across the country, each of them seeing a terrifying reflection of their own vulnerability. It was shared by citizens outraged by what they saw as a grotesque abuse of power. By morning, the city was a cauldron of public anger. Protesters, a mix of off-duty first responders in their union T-shirts and ordinary citizens, gathered on the steps of City Hall, their signs reading, "First Responders Save Lives," "Not Sit in Cuffs," and "Fire Corbin Now." The mayor's office was inundated with furious phone calls. The police department was forced to hold a press conference. Chief Donovan, looking haggard and grim, stood at a podium and faced a barrage of shouted questions from reporters. "Chief, why was Officer Corbin still on the street with a history of complaints? Will you be pursuing criminal charges against the officer for assault? What are you doing to ensure this never happens again?" Donovan read from a prepared statement. his voice heavy. The actions depicted on that video are deeply disturbing and do not reflect the values or the training of this police department. Officer Corbin has been suspended without pay, and I have recommended his termination to the Civilian Oversight Board. An internal and a criminal investigation are both active and ongoing. We are committed to a full and transparent accounting of this incident. But his words did little to quell the firestorm. The EMS fire chief, Brenda Wallace, issued her own statement, which was far more pointed. Paramedic Jessica Russo acted with a level of professionalism and courage that should make our entire city proud. She was assaulted, and yet her first and only concern was for her patient. The systemic failures that allowed this to happen must be addressed. Our paramedics must be protected, not targeted. The story of Jessica Russo became a symbol of a larger conversation about policing, authority, and the fundamental trust between different branches of public service. Editorials were written praising her composure and condemning the warrior cop mentality that seemed to have infected Officer Corbin. Talk radio buzzed with callers sharing their own negative experiences with law enforcement. For Jessica, the sudden fame was overwhelming. Her picture was on the news, her name in the papers. She was hailed as a hero, but she didn't feel like one. She felt like a paramedic who had just been trying to do her job. She stopped watching the news and tried to ignore the noise, focusing instead on the updates from the hospital. Arthur Hemmings, after a successful surgery to relieve the pressure on his brain, was in stable condition and was expected to make a slow but steady recovery. That, to her, was the only victory that mattered. The public reaction had a profound impact on the unfolding legal battle. The city's position had been weakened from untenable to catastrophic. They were no longer just facing a lawsuit, they were facing a full-blown public relations disaster. The pressure on the mayor and the city council to resolve the situation, not just legally but morally, was immense. In his office, Ben Carter watched the news coverage with a grim satisfaction. The court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. The leaked video had done more than his legal filings ever could. It had made Jessica's case personal to every citizen in the city. It ensured that there would be no quiet settlement, no sweeping this under the rug. The city was now on trial in the eyes of its own people, and the unblinking eye of the camera had made every citizen a member of the jury. 2 weeks after the incident on Elm Street, Benjamin Carter filed the lawsuit. The complaint, a meticulously crafted 48-page document, was filed not with the county courthouse, but with the clerk of the United States District Court. This was a deliberate, strategic move. A state court might be more sympathetic to a local police department, tangled in the web of municipal politics. A federal court, however, operated under a different mandate, the upholding of the United States Constitution. The lawsuit named its defendants, Officer Mark Corbin, in his individual capacity, Police Chief Frank Donovan, in his official capacity, and the city itself. The charges were damning and laid out in stark legal prose. Count 1. Unlawful seizure and false arrest in violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. This count alleged that Corbin, acting under the color of law, had deprived Jessica of her constitutional right to be free from unreasonable seizure by arresting her without probable cause. Count 2. Excessive force in violation of the 4th Amendment. This count detailed the physical act of grabbing Jessica, twisting her arm, and forcing her into handcuffs as an objectively unreasonable use of force against a compliant, non-threatening individual. Count 3. First Amendment retaliation. This was a more nuanced but powerful charge. Carter argued that Corbin's actions were in direct retaliation for Jessica exercising her First Amendment right to free speech. Specifically, By questioning the legality of his order and calmly stating her medical duty, the arrest was not to enforce a law, but to punish her for speaking up. Count 4. A Monell claim against the city. This was the bombshell. Carter alleged that the city had a de facto policy and custom of failing to properly train, supervise, and discipline its police officers, specifically regarding interactions with other first responders and the use of de-escalation tactics. He cited Officer Corbin's prior complaints as evidence that the department had been on notice of his aggressive tendencies and had demonstrated a deliberate indifference by failing to act. This count put the entire police department's culture and practices on trial. Finally, the suit included state-level claims for assault, battery, false imprisonment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The filing of a federal lawsuit transformed the case. It was no longer a local news story. It was now a matter of federal jurisprudence. The city's legal department, which had been handling the case, was now forced to bring in outside counsel, a large, expensive law firm that specialized in defending municipalities in federal civil rights cases. The cost to the taxpayers was already beginning to mount before a single motion was filed. The legal process began to grind forward. The first step was discovery, the phase where each side is legally required to turn over all relevant evidence to the other. Carter's first request for production was a sprawling, all-encompassing demand for documents. He wanted everything: all body cam and dash cam recordings related to the incident, Officer Corbin's complete personnel file, including every performance review, commendation, and complaint, all internal affairs files related to Corbin, even those deemed unfounded, the department's training manuals on use of force, de-escalation, and interagency cooperation with EMS, all complaints filed against any officer in the department for excessive force or false arrest in the last 5 years. All emails and internal communications within the police department and the city attorney's office mentioning the incident. The city's lawyers fought back, filing motions to quash the requests as overly broad and burdensome. But the federal magistrate judge assigned to the case, a formidable former prosecutor, saw through their attempts to obstruct in a scathing ruling. She ordered the city to produce the documents, stating, "The public's interest in transparency and the plaintiff's right to a fair hearing far outweigh the department's desire to hide from its own potential failures." For Jessica, the legal maneuvering felt distant and abstract. Her life had been irrevocably altered. She had been placed on administrative duty by the EMS department, a well-intentioned move to shield her from the stress of frontline work, but it felt like a punishment. She missed the rhythm of the ambulance, the challenge of the calls, the feeling of making a difference. She was now a plaintiff in a high-profile lawsuit, her days filled with meetings with lawyers and preparations for depositions. She found herself becoming hyper-vigilant. Every time she saw a police car, her heart would race. She replayed the arrest in her mind, the feeling of helplessness, the cold bite of the handcuffs. The emotional toll was far heavier than she had anticipated. Ben Carter was sensitive to this, but also knew what was at stake. "Jessica, I know this is hard," he told her during one of their meetings. "But what we are doing here is bigger than your case. We are creating a legal precedent. When we win, the next time an officer thinks about bullying a paramedic or a firefighter, they will hesitate. They will think of this lawsuit. They will think of the consequences. That's the change we're fighting for." The fight had moved from the sunny pavement of Elm Street to the hallowed, wood-paneled halls of the federal courthouse. It was no longer just about one officer's temper, but about the constitutional rights of every citizen and the sacred duty of those sworn to protect and serve. All of them. A deposition is not a trial, but it can feel like one. It is a sworn, out-of-court testimony given by a witness or a party in a lawsuit, recorded by a court reporter. It is where cases are often won or lost, long before a jury is ever seated. 3 months after the lawsuit was filed, it was Mark Corbin's turn. He sat at the head of a long conference table in a sterile, neutral law office. On one side sat the city's defense attorneys. On the other sat Benjamin Carter, flanked by Jessica Russo and a paralegal. A videographer aimed a camera at Corbin, and a court reporter sat at the end of the table, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine. Corbin had been coached for hours by his lawyers. Keep answers short, don't volunteer information, stick to the facts in the report, don't lose your temper. For the first hour, Corbin held to his training. Carter began with simple biographical questions, lulling him into a false sense of security. Then, he moved to the incident itself. "Officer Corbin," Carter began, his voice calm and even. "Let's talk about your arrival on Elm Street. You were frustrated by the traffic, is that correct?" "I was aware that the street was blocked. Yes," Corbin replied, his voice a flat monotone. "Did you, at any point before confronting paramedic Russo, attempt to ascertain the nature of the medical emergency?" "My primary duty was to address the traffic obstruction. So the answer is no?" Carter pressed. "No." Carter nodded, making a note. "When you approached the paramedics, you ordered them to move their vehicle. Is that correct?" "I gave them a lawful order. Yes." "Are you familiar with State Vehicle Code 21055, officer?" Carter asked, his tone casual. Corbin shifted in his seat. "I'm familiar with the vehicle code." "Then you'd know that Section 21055 exempts authorized emergency vehicles from most traffic laws when responding to an emergency call, as long as they are operating their lights and sirens." "The ambulance's lights were flashing, were they not?" "Yes, but—" "So your order to move the vehicle, an order that contradicted their emergency exemption, was not, in fact, a lawful order, was it?" The city's attorney objected. "Calls for a legal conclusion." Carter smiled faintly. "I'll rephrase. Did you believe, at that moment, that your desire to clear traffic superseded the state law that allowed the ambulance to be there?" Corbin's jaw tightened. He could feel the trap closing. "I believed the vehicle needed to be moved." Carter moved on, his questioning becoming a relentless, methodical dissection of every second of the encounter. He used the transcript of the body cam footage as his guide. "Let's go to page 4 of the transcript, line 12. Paramedic Russo says to you, quote, 'Officer, we have a critical patient. He's an 82-year-old man with a potential head bleed.'" "Did you hear her say that?" "I heard her," Corbin mumbled. "And what was your response to this information that a man's life was in danger?" Corbin was silent. Carter provided the answer for him. "Your response, according to the transcript, was, 'I don't care what you had to do.' Did you say that, officer?" It was a heated moment. "I'm sure it was," Carter said, his voice dripping with irony. "But did you say it?" "Yes." The questioning continued for hours. Carter expertly used Corbin's own words, his own actions captured on video, to paint a portrait of an officer who was not upholding the law, but was on a personal power trip. The final and most crucial part of the deposition focused on the arrest. "Officer, let's talk about your decision to place paramedic Russo in handcuffs," Carter said, leaning forward. "At that moment, was she physically threatening you?" "No." "Was she attempting to flee?" "No." "Was she destroying evidence?" "No." "So, there was no threat. And yet, you felt it was necessary to physically assault her, arrest her, and abandon her patient." "Objection!" the defense attorney shouted. "Mischaracterizes the testimony as an assault." "Sustained," Carter said, waving a hand dismissively. Let me put it this way. Officer Corbin, after paramedic Russo turned her back on you to return to her patient, you said, and I quote, "I'm teaching her a lesson." What lesson, precisely, were you attempting to teach her? This was the moment, the culmination of the entire deposition. Corbin's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. The frustration, the humiliation, the anger at being interrogated for hours, it all boiled over. His face flushed a deep red. He pointed a finger at Jessica. The lesson is that you don't disrespect a police officer. The lesson is that nobody is above the law. She thought because she was a paramedic she could do whatever she wanted. I was showing her that this is my street, and my rules are the ones that matter. The outburst was met with a stunned silence. Corbin's own lawyer put his head in his hands. Ben Carter sat back in his chair, a grimly satisfied look on his face. Jessica Russo simply watched him, not with hatred, but with a kind of sad pity. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine, capturing every single damning word. On the video camera, the red recording light glowed like a malevolent eye. Corbin had just confessed, not to a crime, but to a motive. He admitted, under oath and on camera, that his actions had nothing to do with public safety and everything to do with his own bruised ego. Ben Carter looked at the city's defense attorney and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. They both knew it was over. The deposition had not just been a nail in the coffin of their defense, it had been a stick of dynamite. There would be no trial. There would only be a surrender. The fallout from Mark Corbin's deposition was immediate and decisive. The video and transcript landed on Eleanor Vance's desk at the city attorney's office with the force of an earthquake. His on-camera tirade, his admission of ego-driven motives, had vaporized the last shred of the city's defense. Vance called an emergency meeting with the mayor, the city manager, and the entire city council. They gathered in a closed-door executive session, the atmosphere heavy with dread. "I'll be blunt," Vance began, foregoing any pleasantries. "We are no longer in a position to negotiate. We are in a position to mitigate a catastrophe. Officer Corbin's deposition was an unmitigated disaster. He confessed, under oath, that his actions were a form of personal retribution. If a jury sees that video, and they will, the damages will not just be compensatory, they will be punitive. A jury will want to punish the city for employing an officer like him and for failing to stop him." She laid out the potential costs of a trial. The legal fees for their outside counsel were already approaching $500,000. A jury verdict could easily climb into the 8-figure range, not to mention the punitive damages that could double that. The political cost would be even higher. A public trial would mean months of negative headlines, replaying the body cam footage and the deposition video over and over, further eroding public trust in the police department. "Benjamin Carter knows exactly what he has," Vance continued. "He holds all the cards. He has made a new settlement demand, and I am recommending, in the strongest possible terms, that we accept it." She slid a document across the table. The number at the bottom was staggering. $13.1 million. A council member gasped. $13 million for a wrongful arrest? That's insane. "Is it?" Vance countered, her voice sharp. "What is the price for a paramedic's civil rights? What is the price for the public's trust? What is the cost of a police department that failed to discipline an officer who was a walking liability? A jury will ask those same questions, and I promise you, their answer might be much, much higher. This number, as shocking as it is, buys us certainty. It ends this. It allows us to begin the process of rebuilding." The debate was tense, but the outcome was inevitable. They were cornered. The evidence was absolute. To fight would be fiscally irresponsible and politically suicidal. With a heavy sense of resignation, The council voted unanimously to approve the settlement. It was one of the largest settlements for a police misconduct case in the city's history. The news broke the next day. The headline dominated the front page of the local paper. City to pay paramedic $13.1 million in landmark police misconduct settlement. The settlement agreement was a public document. It contained no confidentiality clause, another non-negotiable demand from Ben Carter. He wanted the world to know what had happened and what it had cost. The agreement also stipulated that the city formally admit that Officer Corbin's actions were unlawful, unjustified, and a violation of Miss Russo's constitutional rights. There would be no quiet language about no admission of wrongdoing. This was a full, public capitulation. For Jessica, the news of the settlement was a strange, hollow victory. The money was a life-altering sum, but it had never been about the money. It was about accountability. The money was just the city's way of quantifying its failure. It was the price tag they put on her humiliation, on her pain, and on the terror of those few minutes on Elm Street. She met with Ben Carter one last time to sign the final papers. "You did it, Jessica," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You stood your ground, not just on that street, but through this whole process. You forced them to be held accountable." "We did it," she corrected him. "What happens to him now?" "The settlement is the civil side," Carter explained. "The departmental and criminal side is next. And this public admission of guilt from the city makes his termination a foregone conclusion." That evening, Jessica sat in her small apartment, the quiet hum of the city outside her window. The legal battle was over. The check would come, the money would be deposited, but the scars would remain. She thought about Arthur Hemmings, who was now in a rehabilitation facility, slowly learning to walk again. She thought about David, her partner, who had stood by her. And she thought about Mark Corbin, a man whose life was now in ruins because he could not control his own ego. The settlement wasn't a prize. It was a painful public acknowledgement of a wrong that should never have happened. It was a declaration, paid for by the taxpayers, that a paramedic's duty to save a life could not and would not be overruled by a police officer's demand to clear the road. The glare of a potential trial had been avoided, but the cost of the settlement cast its own long, expensive shadow over the entire city. The record-breaking settlement was not the end of the story. It was the catalyst for the final, institutional reckoning. With the civil case concluded and the city having publicly admitted fault, the path was cleared for the administrative and procedural consequences to rain down. First came the fate of Mark Corbin. His unpaid suspension became a formal termination hearing before the city's Civilian Police Oversight Board. The hearing was a formality. The city's own lawyers, who in other circumstances might have defended the city's right to discipline its employees as it saw fit, now presented the case against Corbin. They played the body cam footage. They read excerpts from his deposition. They entered the $13.1 million settlement as evidence of the damage he had caused. Corbin's union-appointed lawyer put up a weak defense, citing the stress of the job, but it was useless. The board voted unanimously for his immediate termination for gross misconduct, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. But the consequences didn't stop there. Benjamin Carter, on behalf of Jessica, filed a formal complaint with the state's Peace Officer Standards and Training Post Board, the agency responsible for certifying all law enforcement officers. He submitted the same mountain of evidence. The Post Board conducted its own review and, in an unusually swift decision, permanently revoked Mark Corbin's law enforcement certification. The revocation meant he could never work as a police officer, sheriff's deputy, or even a licensed security guard anywhere in the state again. His career in law enforcement was not just over, it was erased. The ripple effect continued inside the police department. An exhaustive internal affairs investigation, prompted by the Monell claim in the lawsuit, concluded that the department's supervision had indeed been lax. The sergeants and lieutenants who had previously dismissed the informal complaints against Corbin as minor issues were formally disciplined for failure to supervise. One was demoted. Chief Donovan, under immense pressure from the mayor and the public, announced a sweeping overhaul of department policy. He stood before the media once more, not to defend his department, but to announce its penance. The incident on Elm Street was a catastrophic failure that we must learn from, he declared. Effective immediately, the department is entering into a voluntary consent decree with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division to ensure national best practices are implemented. The overhaul was comprehensive. New training, a mandatory 40-hour course on de-escalation and crisis intervention, was instituted for every officer, from rookie to veteran. A significant portion of this training was dedicated to interagency cooperation, co-taught by senior paramedics and firefighters, designed to foster mutual respect and understanding of each other's roles at emergency scenes. Body camera, oversight. A new independent auditor was appointed to conduct random quarterly reviews of body camera footage from all officers to identify and correct unprofessional conduct before it could escalate. Use of Force Review. The Use of Force Review Board was restructured to include civilian members and a representative from the EMS department, ensuring that incidents involving other first responders would be scrutinized by those with relevant expertise. Early Warning System. The department implemented a new computerized system to track officer behavior, flagging individuals who accumulated multiple complaints, use of force incidents, or traffic stops that disproportionately targeted certain demographics. An officer like Corbin would now be flagged for intervention and retraining long before his behavior could lead to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. For Officer Evans, the rookie who had been Corbin's partner, the path was different. After his paid suspension, he completed his mandatory retraining and a psychological evaluation. He was cleared for duty and assigned to a new field training officer, a woman known for her calm demeanor and strict adherence to policy. Evans returned to patrol a more humbled, cautious, and arguably better officer, forever marked by the memory of what he had witnessed. The final reckoning was not just about punishment. It was about change. A broken system, exposed by the actions of one man and the resilience of one woman, was being forcibly rebuilt. The cost was astronomical. The embarrassment was profound, but the hope was that the changes would be permanent. A new bulletin was posted in every police precinct in the city. It didn't have a photo. It just had a number, $13,100,000. Underneath it, a single sentence was printed in bold, black letters. This is the price of ego. Act accordingly. The message was clear. The department and the city would not forget the lesson taught on Elm Street. Months after the settlement checks were signed and the headlines faded, Jessica Russo returned to full duty. She stepped back into the familiar sterile interior of Ambulance Unit 73, the scent of antiseptic cleaner a strange kind of comfort. Her partner, David Miller, was there beside her, a steady, reassuring presence. The department had offered her a permanent desk job, a promotion to a training role, anything to keep their new multi-million-dollar asset out of harm's way. She refused. "I'm a paramedic," she had told Chief Wallace. "I belong on the street." But something had changed. The change was not in her skill or her dedication, if anything. Those were sharper. The change was in the quiet spaces between the calls. When she saw a police cruiser approaching in her rearview mirror, her knuckles would still whiten on the steering wheel. At emergency scenes, She found herself unconsciously assessing the police officers present, a new layer of tactical awareness she had never needed before. It was a scar, an invisible wound that hadn't fully healed. Her return was a quiet triumph. The first time she and David worked alongside the police at a major traffic accident. The responding sergeant walked directly over to her. He was a man she didn't know. "Paramedic Russo," he said, his voice filled with a gruff respect. "The scene is secure. Let us know what you need. We're here to help you." It was a small moment, but it was everything. The message had been received. Jessica became a reluctant icon within the national EMS community. Her story was used as a case study in training seminars on interagency cooperation. She received letters and emails from paramedics across the country, thanking her for her courage and for forcing a conversation that was long overdue. She never sought the attention, but she accepted the responsibility that came with it. She had survived a trial by fire, and her experience now served as a shield for others. The city, too, was changed. The new police training protocols were difficult and expensive to implement, but the culture began to slowly shift. The us versus them mentality that had poisoned officers like Mark Corbin began to give way to a grudging but growing sense of partnership with other city services. The consent decree forced a level of transparency and accountability that the department had resisted for decades. The name Mark Corbin became a cautionary tale whispered in the police academy, a synonym for career suicide. Jessica never saw Mark Corbin again. She heard through the grapevine that he had moved out of state, his life and reputation in tatters, unable to find meaningful work. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a profound sense of waste, a life, a career, a city's trust, all squandered for a fleeting moment of dominance on a quiet residential street. One sunny afternoon, a year after the incident, Jessica and David were treating a woman who had fallen in a park. As they loaded her into the ambulance, a young boy, no older than 10, watched them from a distance. He walked over hesitantly. "Are you a hero?" he asked, his eyes wide with awe. Jessica looked down from the ambulance, her uniform on, her hands steady. She thought of the terror of the handcuffs, the cold fury of the fight, and the long, quiet process of healing. She thought of Arthur Hemmings, who was now back in his home, his life saved. She smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "No," she said gently. "I'm a paramedic. We just show up to help." She closed the doors, and the ambulance pulled away, its siren beginning to rise. She was back where she belonged, answering the call, bound by the oath she had taken. The scars remained, but so did the purpose. She was a healer in a city that was still healing itself, a city that had been forced to learn a painful, multi-million-dollar lesson about the true meaning of public service. The story of Jessica Russo and Mark Corbin is more than just a clash between two individuals. It's a deep look into the psychology of power and the quiet integrity of duty. What drives a man like Corbin to abandon reason for rage? It often begins not with malice, but with insecurity. In his world, the uniform and the badge were a shield against a feeling of powerlessness. His authority was his identity. When Jessica, a paramedic operating with her own form of authority, the authority of medical necessity, calmly refused his order, he didn't hear a professional disagreement. He heard a fundamental challenge to his very existence. Her composure was a mirror reflecting his own lack of control, and in a desperate, self-destructive act of ego preservation, he chose to shatter that mirror rather than look at his own reflection. His aggression was not strength. It was the terrified lashing out of a man who felt his power slipping away. We can ask ourselves, What if things had gone differently? If Jessica had been more confrontational, would it have justified his actions in the eyes of his superiors? Likely not. But it would have muddied the waters, giving them a sliver of an excuse to frame it as a mutual escalation. Her unwavering professionalism was her greatest weapon, leaving him no ground to stand on. If Sergeant Rostova hadn't arrived, would Corbin have taken Jessica to jail? Almost certainly, and in doing so, he would have sealed a much darker fate for Arthur Hemmings and an even greater legal penalty for himself and the city. The intervention of a competent supervisor was the system's first and most critical safeguard. A reminder that the culture of an entire department can rest on the shoulders of individuals willing to police their own. The ultimate lesson here is one of quiet strength. True authority isn't shouted through a bullhorn or enforced with handcuffs. It's earned through competence, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to one's duty. Jessica's power wasn't in a badge or a weapon, but in her knowledge, her steady hands, and her refusal to abandon her patient. She won not by being louder or stronger, but by being better. She upheld her oath while he betrayed his. This story reminds us that in any system, the potential for abuse of power exists. But so does the profound power of individual integrity to stand against it, expose it, and ultimately overcome it. What does true professionalism under pressure look like to you? Have you ever witnessed someone in a position of authority handle a situation with grace, or with a lack of it? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because these conversations are how we build a better community. And if this story moved you, please consider liking and subscribing for more content that matters.